All right, so we're ready to go, and looks like we're starting with Elizabeth on the DMV records.
Oh, yeah. So, again, another third party organization that we use got breached. And it's not just the state of California, it's many states across the country, which could lead to some more extensive problems later. However, California is the only one that's been reported on. Somehow I doubt that these evil hackers just went in there and said, "Oh, just give us one state worth of PII, please." So I imagine we're going to be hearing some more about other states as it as the story unfolds some more.
Yep, of course, I don't know what harm you can do with just name, address, and license plate number. Isn't that public information anyway?
I mean, theoretically, but one of the issues is that it's got when the DMV records have everyone's previous addresses tagged to it, which can often be used for security verification purposes, especially at financial institutions. And they also this company also handles a lot of payment processing, stuff like rent collection, cell phone bill payments, some tax stuff, and things like that. So,
okay. All right.
Interesting.
What's that, Irvin? Okay, anyway.
I didn't say anything.
Oh, okay.
Not yet.
Then we got GE Force.
Yes, the G-Force. I'm going to cover the second half because Kaitlyn has an article that covers the first half.
Yeah.
So NVIDIA has a CMP chip now that's supposed to be built for mining.
Oh.
So if you want to do Bitcoin mining, there is a chip for that. I can't find any place that is selling the chip, even though they're saying it's available from Asus, EVGA, Gigabyte, and so on. They have some specs for those chips, but I don't quite see any price tags for them.
Yeah, well, what I've heard is anything for Bitcoin mining is always sold out in a hurry.
Right. That's exactly what's going on. NVIDIA is having a big problem with their graphics card, which they're trying to target towards, gaming and stuff like that, being bought out by Bitcoin miners, and so no one can get their card for, in their intended market. But I'll go over a bit more on that later.
Yeah. So I'm covering the second half, which is they're launching the crypto mining processor series. Like I said, I can't find any price tags for them yet.
I thought all Bitcoin mining was now done with ASICs anyway, specifically designed for the purpose, but I guess maybe not. Anyway, so we got Perseverance on Mars, of course, the big news.
Yep, the big news. Yeah, the rover Perseverance landed on Mars in a very nominal way. Nothing went wrong whatsoever. It went in to the upper atmosphere. It essentially deployed a heat shield, slowed down, and then deployed a parachute, a drag chute.
Hold on, I got some garbage going on. I can't turn off here. Okay, fine.
Oh, so it
plays some kind of autoplay garbage on there that won't turn off. Anyway,
why do websites still do that? Anyway, so
who knows?
Yeah, so it deployed a parachute, and then it dropped the heat shield when it was safe to do so, and then it deployed a landing system which had it was basically like a bunch of little rockets, probably monopropellant, I presume. All that was just basically like a little lander system, and then it dropped the rover with a bunch of ropes, and then gently placed it on the ground, and then released the ropes, flew off to north. Very simple process.
Yeah, they call that the sky crane. Right?
The sky crane, exactly. So it was there was a lot of steps. Everything just went nominally, which was amazing.
Yeah.
And it's there, and what really shocked me was we got pictures right away. There's a little camera underneath the rover for just making sure that the rover doesn't hit any rocks or anything. Mm-hmm. And that camera right away, within seconds of hitting the ground, turned on, sent images back, and Yeah, we now have a new rover on Mars named Perseverance and a helicopter on Mars.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Which
I
sounds
saw-
impossible because there's almost no air.
That's what I was saying. Mars has 1% the atmosphere of Earth, right?
Yeah.
And so you would think like nothing could fly, but apparently they have a drone that will fly in 1% of the atmosphere of Earth, which, okay.
I saw Laura mentioning that the rover was sending data at like 2 kilobytes a second or something.
Right. So when you're dealing with this kind of distance, especially if you're not like relaying the data between different points, in order to get a good, strong signal back, in order to, make sure there's no errors in the data, you just have to send it very slowly.
Yeah.
And these missions are not just go there for 5 minutes and take samples and come back. It's going to be there for a month, so you can take it. It can take its time.
I wonder what the latency is from outer space.
It's something ridiculous.
Well, it's 11 minutes there, 11 minutes back right now.
That's actually like kind of impressive to me.
Right. So when we were watching the live stream, what we were actually watching was something that happened 11 minutes ago due to just the sheer distance, the speed of light. But of course, we're talking about relativity and space-time here. So what is now becomes very confusing with the distance from Earth to Mars. But
Yep. Oh,
Very
good. Yeah, and then we got romance scams from Alan.
Yes, just in time for, actually now it's too late for Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
The FTC has released a report, and the crux of it is if you recently met somebody online and they have told you a story about how they need some money transferred, you should probably think twice about it, especially now, it being around the time of Valentine's Day. Romance scams, nothing new. However, the statistics are quite alarming. The FTC in this study says that over $300 million have been reported stolen. And this is from people who have self-reported to the FTC. So I'm sure that's just a fraction of the actual dollar amount scammed only in the year 2020.
Yeah.
And the median amount per victim was $2,500, with that amount going up as the victims got older. For victims 70 years older and older, the median was $9,475. So quite a substantial amount of money.
Yeah.
And it's been increasing every year, apparently. So
Yeah, I'm not surprised at all. I think it's the rise in loneliness in our society.
yeah, it seems like COVID was great for these scammers. Again, self-reported, but in 2019, the figure was only 200 million. Now this year, or in 2020, 300 million. So 50% increase in just 1 year's time.
Yeah, I've known 2 men that made their entire living off of women. They just had an endless succession of girlfriends that would give them money until they kicked them out, and then they'd find another one and another one and another one and just live their whole life that way. It's like a slinky going down the stairs. It's, and I never could figure out how they did it. There was something irresistibly attractive about these men that I could not see.
Well, they were smart because they were scammers, but they weren't doing anything illegal.
No, definitely not illegal.
Whereas these scammers, once they get caught, and there was a scammer who got caught recently, well, they're going to jail for a number of years for that.
Yeah, that's why I'd say this is sort of just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Yeah, love just doesn't live up to the picture on the box, Anyway,
No.
So this
Now,
one,
apparently the scammers like to use pictures of attractive people. So if you interact with somebody who's attractive online, it's a scam.
well, I certainly can tell that. That's why they actually tell, I think, CIA officers that. They say, if some really hot woman is hitting on you in a bar and you're not hot, don't fool yourself. She's a spy. You didn't suddenly become attractive.
Yeah.
But people will.
Well, you did, but for a different reason.
What's that? Oh, yeah. It's a different reason, not just for money.
Reason.
Yeah. So anyway, this one I thought was very interesting. At first, I thought this was a scam, a 34-year-old startup backed by Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos with unlimited clean energy. And then it starts talking about fusion. And I thought it was a scam, but they're not kidding. They're not planning to put these things online until 2030, and they're going to be based on the tokamak, which is a real fusion power plant that did get net positive energy about 2 years ago. So they're trying to make fusion nuclear power plants. And I remember when I was a kid, my mom was the #1 protester against nuclear power in Pennsylvania. But now I'm hearing increasingly from Bill Gates and many other people that we really need nuclear power now because of it's the only way to get enough clean energy.
Well, I mean, what's wrong with
relatively clean? Go ahead.
Well, I mean, why would anyone protest nuclear fusion?
Well, there was no nuclear fusion at that time. It was nuclear fission, and she was upset about the waste.
Yeah, no, yeah, nuclear fission produces a lot of waste and radioactive. Yeah, no, it's no good. But fusion, though, I mean, is really clean. I mean, it's as clean as solar, and I mean, it's literally that's what solar is. It's nuclear fusion.
Well, yeah. Now it does produce tritium, which is in fact unhealthy, but it decays in 7 years, so it's pretty easy to get rid of.
And not only that, tritium is very useful for making your own little voltaic batteries.
Well, yes, but you remember back in the women that was radium, I guess they licked off their paintbrushes. But anyway, tritium, yeah, that's why, I mean, nuclear fusion, if you could make it work, would really be the best way to make large amounts of power with very little consequence. So it sounds pretty promising. 2030, I had no idea it was anywhere near that close.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing I wish I could explain to everyone is that there's a big difference between nuclear fission and nuclear fusion. And that just because there's nuclear in the name does not mean that nuclear fusion is in any way bad for the environment. It doesn't mean there's going to be any radioactive fallout or meltdowns or anything you have with nuclear fission, which has, Yeah,
no, fusion would be much better.
Interesting that we're making all these big environmental changes for 2030. But there's a lot of car manufacturers aiming at that year to be the year that they'll sell only electrics.
Yeah, and if we made that electric with clean power, I was also very surprised and happy to hear, of course, they're having a disaster in Texas, but one fact that they published is like 15% of the energy in Texas is made with windmills now. And again, I had no idea that renewables had gone that far. So I think it's much more possible than I had imagined by 2030 or so that we'll get most of our electricity from real renewables. And that, of course, would be great. It's the fossil fuel that's destroying the planet, and we really need to knock it off. But I thought it was pretty impractical to use anything else, and apparently not.
Yeah, and as mentioned before on this podcast, we hit peak oil last year, or no, 2 years ago. I mean, we're on the way out of oil, and that doesn't really seem to be discussed enough. That used to be a big thing, a big talking point, that when are we going to hit peak oil? When are we going to hit peak oil? And we did. And then no one seems to talk about it. But yeah, oil's on the way out. We're transitioning to cleaner energy sources now, for better or for worse.
Well, I'm really glad to hear this stuff, because when I grew up as a teenager, it was the 60s and 70s, and all environmentalism was just gloom and doom. The population's going to increase. We're totally doomed. We're already past the point of no return. There's nothing you can do. And that was like a really bad message to give people, because all it means you give up. And now I'm hearing a lot more optimistic, positive measures. There are things we can do. We're doing them. We're probably going to make it. I think that's a much better message.
Well, part of it, we're at the point of no return. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, we've already kind of messed things up enough. And that's part of the catalyst for what's going on right now. Global warming is no longer a hypothetical, maybe will happen, we should stop it before it becomes a problem issue. It's Texas has no power and people are dying issue at this point. So
We're there.
Yeah.
Oh, it totally is. And anyway, so we got Uber shutting down the app.
Yeah, so essentially this guy who was delivering food for Uber Eats out in Pittsburgh realized that he would get alerts on his phone for like a 6-minute trip, and he's like, well, I'm on a bicycle, so I know it's going to take longer than that, 10 or 20 minutes. Then he'd go make the delivery, and he realized he'd made a delivery that was like, they'd say it was like 4 miles long, and he had to ride up all these hills to get the food there and everything, and it took him a while. And then when he got paid, he realized he'd gotten paid for a 1 mile trip, and he was like, this isn't okay. I'm getting screwed here. And so he wrote an app that, or a Chrome extension rather, that essentially plugged the same trip into Google Maps and calculated the actual distance traveled versus he'd realized that the Uber app was often calculating just straight line distance, which makes it a lot cheaper to pay when you're not taking into account actual distance traveled, traffic, all that stuff. So he wrote this app, this extension, put it on the store, and it was actually quite useful to a lot of drivers because they could see whether or not they were getting screwed, and then notify Uber, hey, like you shorted my pay. Well, Uber didn't like this after a while because apparently they are pretty, part of their business model is shifting the operational costs onto their contractors, like so many successful businesses. And so they strong-armed Google into taking it off of the Chrome store because they said that people might confuse it for the real Uber app, which is
Right.
So he just needs to change the name.
yeah, it sounds like he he called it Uber Cheats, which they probably didn't like very much. But instead of just agreeing to change the name, he's lawyered up and is trying to fight it.
You know, this is so on brand for Uber. They've done so many sleazy things. Uber and Facebook just seem to be unrelentingly evil all the time.
Yeah, and they, hey, you can get away with it, I guess.
Yep.
And well, I mean, and Google removed "Don't Be Evil" from there.
They did. Yeah. And that
Which
would have
is-
been the right thing to do with the old model of economics, where the only purpose of a corporation is to make money for the investors, and good and evil, those are for small companies. But, you know, the world seems to be moving away from that. Anyways,
Yeah.
so we got the M1 native malware. Nobody has M1 yet, right?
It
was thinking-
finally took a while. I mean, I kind of thought it'd be faster, but we finally have native M1 malware.
Yep.
So those Mac people who thought that they were fine and clear away from any potential malware hitting them because they're on a whole different platform, and not so much anymore. Welcome.
But I thought the malware wasn't too nasty. It's just like a browser extension that pops up ads, which is what I've seen on Macs in general.
Right, but
Relatively
it's
mild malware.
but they're no longer in the clear.
Yeah.
They can't say that you can't get anything on it because nothing's built for it.
Yeah. I really want an M1, but so far they don't have enough storage. The biggest one is only 512 gigs, and that's not enough.
Well, yeah, one misconception I hear Mac users say a lot, and I wish I could explain to them why this isn't the case, is that they think that because they're using a Mac, they are safe from viruses and malware, which is not the case at all. But what confuses me is that I thought that the M1 platform had that Rosetta architecture built in, so it could run x86.
Right.
Old x86 code, including malware. So
It doesn't? I thought it did.
I thought it did too.
It does.
Yeah, it
I
does.
mean, as far as I knew, yeah.
Yeah, so you supposedly, and they say you can run Intel code, and it actually runs pretty well. But there was some argument about running virtual machines, and I think they got that working, but it's not really 100% working.
That'd be good to know if they finally did get VMs working.
Well, I mean, just because it's new, I'm sure they'll get everything working within a few months here, but there will, of course, continue to be problems. I got plenty of problems just from upgrading to the latest version of Mac OS.
And yeah, no, if M1 Macs can virtualize a Windows desktop, at good speeds, I would be really impressed and would be tempted to actually finally get a Mac for myself. We'll see if that actually happens.
Yeah, well, supposedly they got, like sort of prototype versions of it running not too well, but they'll probably improve that. Anyway, so now we got Texas, supposedly only seconds away from a long blackout.
Right. So as we were saying, yeah, Texas right now is dealing with a disaster at the moment. Freezing temperatures have been stressing their various grids, their electric grids, their water grids, water systems, etc. And right now they're going through rolling blackouts. And the reason why they're going through rolling blackouts is because if they had waited any longer and just tried to keep the power going as long as they could, it would have essentially fried a bunch of the power plants, the coal power plants that they were using. And they would have had essentially outages for, for months on end. And instead of just the rolling blackouts that they're having right now. And they were literally minutes and seconds away from a complete and total disaster to their electric grid, which is not good.
I think that's true of all the grids, right? There was a couple of disasters on the East Coast where they had some kind of cascading failure and humans had to intervene.
Yeah. So it's, we're talking, the news right now is really focused on how bad the situation is in Texas.
Yeah.
It could have been a lot worse had some not quick thinking individuals stepped up and, started rolling blackouts immediately.
Yeah. And I've also heard people say this is because Texas has their own grid that's immune from federal regulations, and so they didn't really have to make it as strong as they should have.
That is part of the issue. Okay, let's get into politics for a little bit. Fun times, everyone. So Texas is a very conservative state, and for a long time they were actually, a lot of people in Texas were actually pointing at California and our energy grid, because we have a lot of extremes here and a lot of spaced out cities, and our grid is not the best that it could be. And they were saying things like, oh, it's because they want to do the namby-pamby liberal renewable energy stuff, and nothing to do with the fact that like Los Angeles has these heat waves that like stress our grid, and we have Los Angeles is like another part of the country from like San Francisco, et cetera, et cetera. It's just this giant mess of grids that we have to maintain. That's like almost impossible to maintain. On top of that, we have the same global warming stuff where we have these like massive fires and blah blah blah. Anyway, so it's a complicated situation. But of course, people in Texas were saying, oh well, those Californians, those hippie liberals, they can't even keep the power on. So of course, when global warming hit Texas and now they're in freezing weather, their power grid is struggling too. So I mean, I get it. I understand. I'm not going to say this is a left to right thing. Although a few people in Texas did want to blame this on renewable energy, and to a fair point, the wind energy, the turbines for the wind power that they get in Texas did freeze over. But the major hit from the cold weather actually came from traditional coal and burning fuels to generate power. So that was actually the number one hit, was not the newer renewable energy sources, but the older non-clean sources of power.
And someone made the very good point that, I mean, there are wind farms in Norway and Iceland that operate at far colder temperatures. So
they just didn't build the right kind of wind turbines.
Right. But of course, and Texas, they're very conservative, and they want to have they want to privatize their electric grid.
Yes.
Which is a problem because, I mean, ideally in a situation like this, you would want other states to come in and help supply power, right? You would want the nearby states, you would want, New Mexico to start sending in some of their extra power to help Texas in this situation. But of course, because they want to be separate and do their own thing, they don't have that sort of support in an emergency. And I think this ideology was best summed up by this Texan mayor, I forget his name, But he essentially went on Twitter and said, hey, we're the government. We're not supposed to help you. This is do or die. This is the Hunger Games. Just, don't expect us to come save you. You'll just be dependent. And of course, I think the guy is getting kicked out of office for that. But that sort of attitude where, the government's not going to save everything. It's not the solution to all problems. But if your attitude is that the government cannot solve any problems and shouldn't be solving any problems, then that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you start ending up in situations like we have in Texas. So
it's pretty interesting when you look at the interconnected grid map, when you can see where all the state and interstate grids are connected together, and you can see there's the eastern half of the country and the western half of the country, and then there's just like one little blob down at the bottom that's Texas.
Yeah. But anyway, Texas does need help and support right now, and unfortunately, I don't have any charities that I can share with everyone at the moment. But if you can, do try to lend your support. Texas is in bad shape at the moment. People are really struggling just to get water and heat. I heard somebody passed away in their recliner from, basically heat death.
Yeah. A lot of people dying.
Yeah. So anyway, Texas does need our help and our support. And I don't want to get too much into politics. I just kind of do want to acknowledge that these politics are here.
Oh yeah.
But I right now, the important thing is we, really help Texas, get back on its feet, and they're an important part of the United States.
Yeah, well, apparently they're sending help from the National Guard and stuff in a state of emergency, and also I think the weather's abating, so I guess it's on the mend.
I hope so.
I believe there's also a general aid fund for folks to donate to that to help people out who are struggling.
Yeah, I know AOC raised $1 million for food banks in Texas or something like that. So, yeah. So then we got Alan with Republicans that want to ban municipal broadband.
Yes, continuing with this theme of Cato Institute talking points about how any kind of government action is a moral evil and private corporations are virtuous because they make profits. A couple of Republicans have proposed the Connect Act, which stands for Communities Overregulating Networks Need Economic Competition Today.
There you go.
Which would, quote, promote competition by limiting government-run broadband networks throughout the country and encouraging private investment.
Mm-hmm.
Because as we all know, the government, local and state governments have been engaging in a racket to try to create local high-speed internet access for their citizens, and that this extortionate scheme spearheaded by Democrats has reduced competition and is causing Comcast and AT&T to go out of business, which we all know is imminent. Anyway,
I have the feeling that you disapprove.
I think I might. I think I might just a little bit.
I actually picked this exact same article, and I have a companion piece to go along with it when we get around to it. And,
oh yes. Okay, I won't say too much more about it then.
Oh no, please do, because this is a good lead-in to that. And one thing that I think is interesting is that they didn't really explain how further regulating out independent telecom entities and having fewer choices is going to improve the competition. And I also wonder, how do they intend to enforce this? Does this mean that the FCC is going to come out in white vans and shut you down if you're running a community mesh network like we are here in the Bay Area?
I think existing infrastructure gets grandfathered in, but any new infrastructure is forbidden. And this has already been done in 20 different states. 20 different states have forbidden municipalities from building out their own telecom networks.
I think it really belies how much these politicians are corporate shills because they're, you know, especially the Republicans are supposed to be the party of deregulate everything, deregulate all the things. That's partly why
Yeah.
we're struggling with lack of high-speed internet, broadband infrastructure, and why our power grids are in such poor shape, while the energy companies just have us at their mercy to charge us however much they want and like burn down the state. It doesn't matter. There's no rules there.
Well,
this
you
is
know, I
you.
was wondering about this
Mhm.
since the Republicans, of course, are out of power. This bill will not pass. The Democrats will not sign on to it.
Oh.
I looked into the campaign contributions to the two sponsors of this bill, Representatives Kathy McMorris Rogers and Bob Latta. And I found that the number one contributor to Bob Latta was an American communications organization. So this is payback time. They gave him money. Now he produces the bill. And same deal with Kathy McMorris Rogers. They gave her almost as much money as they did to Bob Latta.
It's just shocking to hear you say that. It's almost like large corporations buy votes in this country.
You know, I was shocked to see it myself.
Well,
I
I'm
couldn't-
surprised that they even bother with this bill because I know this has been going on for years. They have shut down quite a few municipal broadband projects for this reason, that they're illegal. So anyway, we'll see what comes of it.
Well, and you know, one of the other interesting things about this is that these politicians are pushing to override state laws that allow for these things. And you know, where again, like deregulate all the things is out the window. What about states' rights? I guess
Nope.
that's not a convenient place to apply that argument for them.
Well, as usual, I appear to be the fascist on the panel. You know, this seems to me to make some sense. I mean, you tax corporations, you take the tax money, you put up a competing thing and compete against them. It is kind of crazy. And a similar issue is City College. You tax people, you put up free education, then you put DeVry out of business. So, you know, this is, I think, a big tension in our society. You have some socialized stuff and you have some free market stuff, and they bicker.
Well, I just want to point out that DeVry put itself out of business because it was not a competitive product. Likewise, AT&T is going to put itself out of the broadband market because it is not delivering a competitive product either. In fact, they already know this. They've acknowledged it, and they have publicly abandoned DSL.
Yep.
Oh. Yeah, well, yep. So we're going to see where it goes. I mean, what we have now is sort of an uneasy mixture of some socialized stuff and some capitalist stuff, and both sides just yelling and screaming. And that's where we're at. Anyway.
So just to jump off Liz's point about states' rights, it should be noted that whenever anyone mentions anything about states' rights, it's usually just a dog whistle for racism. So
Well, it might be a dog whistle for fascism and capitalism. Lots of other things too. But anyway.
Oh yeah, lots of dog whistles to go around.
There you go.
So you know, don't take it too literally.
Only when conveniently applied to support their points.
Right. The thing about being a fascist in the United States is that a lot of people love the idea of fascism, but they just don't like the idea of being called a fascist. So, you know, they always have to hide their.
And it reminds me of, you know, the folks that like to cherry pick Bible quotes whenever it suits them.
Yes.
You know, it doesn't matter if I've had 8 wives and eat shellfish and wear mixed fiber clothing, but you'd better not be in love with a man if you're a man.
Yeah. Well, anyway, then we got this one about QAnon. This crap means more to him than my life, which I'm very interested in this because I have been in religious communities like this and emerged from them. And, you know, this is a huge issue for, I think, many people in America, that somebody in your family or your friends has sunk into this far right stuff and you don't know how to deal with them because you can't talk to them. All they want to do is talk about this crazy stuff. And what they said a lot, they haven't found anybody to cure these people. But I know from my own experience, you just have to sort of wait for it to burn out. I think it's very closely related to like alcoholism. They have this addiction. If you yell at them about it, it won't help. They have to, it has to run its course. And the directly fighting with them about this crazy stuff, this QAnon stuff, just makes them dig in stronger. And so it reminds me when I was a caretaker for a handicapped guy that had a lot of emotional problems. And when I moved in, his dad told me the most important thing he needs is someone who knows how to say no, because he will drive you nuts and take from you until you leave him and don't have anything to do with him. And he needs someone who can survive. And so you have to like keep a loose connection where you don't get too close to get dug into the craziness that'll drive you nuts, but you have some communication so that when it burns out, then you can talk to them. And that I learned how to do that, which I wasn't able to do when I was younger, how to let certain things slide. And I think it also reminds me, they have this picture of all the people posing with their Q t-shirts in the Q army, and it reminds me of the Hitler Youth. And I think in all the cases, it's people who are lonely seeking a community. And something about proclaiming something that is outrageous makes your community much tighter, because now all the insiders agree about this thing and all the outsiders are evil because they don't even know this, that Trump is saving us from the pedophile Satanists. And that makes you feel much more like you're a member of a family now, that there's this really obvious, clear way to tell, and that we're the good people and those are the bad people.
And it kind of reminded me too a little bit, it reminds me too of you know, if someone in your life that you care about's in an abusive relationship, like they won't listen to you when you're like, get out of there, don't let this person, you know, continue to abuse you. But one of the worst, you know, they're not going to do it until they're ready. And one of the worst things you can do is say, well, I'm not going to be your friend anymore. I'm not going to, you know, be there for you anymore if you don't leave this person, because then that just isolates them even more. And as hard as it is, you've just still got to be there for them, and say, well, if you're gonna make your own mistakes, like still like encourage them to leave if you can, but there's nothing you can do about it, and you got to kind of just wait and keep the lines open and hope they come to their senses and leave.
Yeah, I think this is an advanced relationship skill, drawing boundaries. And the same thing applies to students. Some of the students will drive you nuts and you have to draw a limit.
Well, there's also an issue with the fact that QAnon and a bunch of other conspiracy theories, or a bunch of other I don't know, cults, I guess you could say, are associated with white supremacy or other types of really vile, ideologies. And so you have to balance the fact that the way that you get people out is not through criticism and through, disdain. But at the same time, you sort of have to balance the fact that you really don't want to encourage this or even just be okay with it, right? You don't want to be like, whoa, that person's just, spouting off anti-Semitic, nonsense, Jewish lasers, whatever. Just let them be, because that's how this stuff spreads, right? And out of control, right? You just kind of ignore it and you just say, oh, those people are just out of their minds. And so there's this weird balancing act where you sort of have to, take a stand and be like, no, that person's wrong. Don't be, anti-Semitic or whatever. At the same time, if you really want to help them, you sort of have to still maintain like a friendship and understanding and show them compassion. And there have been studies about how to get people deprogrammed out of cults.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if you should even be trying to bring them out. I think having intentions to control other people is kind of not part of friendship.
Well, no, here's the thing. Yeah, you shouldn't control people. However, in order to get in, there were people out there grooming these people over time, right? There's this QAnon, if we're talking about QAnon, there's this QAnon pipeline, right?
It's mostly YouTube videos.
Like YouTube videos. Yeah. There's other pipelines, but yeah, let's just focus on like YouTube videos, for example, like where you might have these like, gaming channels or whatever. And they might spout a few QAnon things, but, dog whistle it a bit, and just kind of see who's there, and then move them on to something else, move them on until they're ready. So there's been this pipeline there pushing them in that direction the whole time. And so having a pipeline out, I think, can be really helpful. But at the same time, don't try to control other people's lives, people.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance too, especially when somebody's in your family or you're married to them, like the lady in this article. It's like, well, you don't want to enable them, you can't control them, and you shouldn't really want to, but at the same time, it puts you in this pretty rough position where it's like, do I really have to divorce my partner over these YouTube videos? Apparently so in some cases.
Well, I think marriage is a special case, right? Then you're so close to them, you're sharing a house and you're raising your kids, and you really can't tolerate so much. So,
I mean, I've heard some success stories of people who get people out of the KKK through like creating new systems. And like you were saying, like people are lonely. That's why they primarily join. It's not a matter of just, I hate people. It's about community. And, you can build community and get people out. And like I said, there's been a bunch of studies to show how this can be done. And the success stories do give me a lot of hope. And I do like to see people leave and get help. But at the same time, just understand that these are rare. These situations are rare. And I would like to see pipelines, in place to get people out and support available if they want to leave. But yeah, don't try to control people's lives.
yeah, but it really is disturbing, the comparison to the rise of Hitler. It was very much the same. He tried a coup and it failed, and it was 10 years later he took over, and there was this rising group of people that were like this army here. These guys are like the Hitler Youth, and they wear their uniforms and march around and get gradually crazier and crazier and more violent. And everybody in Germany tried to stop them and couldn't figure out how. And I see the same thing happening in America. So
one of the things that happened in Germany is that people thought, the vast majority of people thought these like Hitler Youth people were just right-wing, Nazoid people.
Well, they were.
And they were. But, they just said, let's just hands off, let them, let's not intervene. Let's just let them be themselves over there somewhere. No one's going to take them seriously. And so what we learned from that is that you really do need to take a somewhat proactive stance on these issues. Like you can't just be passive and just assume that just because what they're saying is absolutely ridiculous and hateful and, the vast majority of people don't agree, it doesn't mean they're not a threat.
So what can we do?
Well, you speak out, whenever you can, essentially.
Yeah. Well, that's something, but yeah, it's going to be tough. We're in for a rough ride. Trump is now back, still proclaiming the big lie again. I mean, this stuff is still on the rise. 80% of Republicans are on board with it. It's not over at all. It's like a cancer still growing in the country.
Yeah, and I have concerns that this is going to be a long-term problem going forward.
I think at least for another 5 or 10 years, if we're lucky. Anyway, then we're back to Elizabeth with more about community broadband, or maybe you've already said what you wanted to say about this. I don't know.
The only thing I'll add here is this, the second article under this link here. The first one's the same one as Alan's, but the second one about the community broadband explains some of the ways that the existing laws that prevent that are hurting the very communities in which they've been implemented, especially now during the pandemic, because our access in this country, broadband access in this country is just shameful. Well, it already was, and now that people, even folks who may before have just been casual internet users, now they need it for everything, for work, school, shopping. It's really putting people in a hard place. And, we allow, essentially what we've allowed these companies to do over the past 20 years of deregulation is to allow these companies to form monopolies.
Right.
And I mean, I'm in a place, I'm still like 25% 5 minutes from downtown San Francisco, and I have literally two choices. I can either get Comcast, or I can get AT&T broadband for as long as that's available. Both are extremely expensive for not very great speeds, and the Comcast one has a pretty extortionate data cap that's very, very low. Which I would blow through in like 2 weeks. And that's just me, let alone people who have 3 kids who are on Zoom calls with their teachers all day, and they're on Zoom for work. And I mean, it's just ridiculous. And it's put people in a terrible position, yet we're continuing to allow it to happen and snowball, just because, like we discussed with the previous article, these politicians are bought and sold. I mean, the money talks, and these companies want to maintain their monopolies, of course, because they can get away with offering terrible service for extremely high prices, because what else are you going to do? I'm interested to see what happens with Starlink. And I signed up for I actually sent off a payment for the first round, so I'm hoping that they roll it out pretty soon, and I get my dish, and I can tell you how that goes. But I mean, it's still insane to me that I can be this close to San Francisco and have no fiber at all, no fiber availability. In my other spot, I could see downtown San Francisco from the parking lot, and there was not only was there no fiber, there was no cable. Only thing I could get was really terrible and unreliable DSL or satellite.
Yeah, I want to hear about how that Starlink works out.
Yeah.
And Irvin, we're up to your last article. I hope you can have enough time to talk about the tracker pixels.
Yes, so there are tracker pixels that could be one by one in emails to track things like the browser you're using and what you're up to. The easy way to block is, so I know that like Proton Mail does this, where it will not load any pictures until you click to load. But this is basically saying these things have gone a little too far in tracking you in ways that you can't even see, because who can see a one by one pixel?
Well, yeah, but these have been around forever, and I thought I'm surprised that email clients aren't already blocking it.
Yeah, that's the interesting part, is that they're not, unless it's something like Proton where you have to click on a button in order to load images.
Yeah. So, but what are they doing that hurts you, though? The most common thing I know is it tells you if somebody read the email.
Well, it's pretty much doing stuff like that and just getting information about you.
Yeah.
So like the number of times the email's open, the IP address of the user's location, device usage, that kind of stuff. It's not really doing harm other than being spyware.
Yeah. So I guess this violates GDPR, though.
Yes, it does.
Well, that's good. That might begin to bring it under control. And then Kaitlyn's got more NVIDIA.
More NVIDIA. Yep. So this dovetails into Irvin's article about the new crypto mining processors. So as mentioned, NVIDIA has a big problem, right? They really want to sell their graphics cards to quote unquote gamers at home. However, they're all being bought up by people trying to crypto mine. And so people can't get their product into their intended market. So I understand that they're coming out with their new crypto mining processor card. And that's all great. But the other thing that they're doing, which I don't agree with at all, is that they are intentionally crippling the drivers so that if you try to run crypto mining software, it'll run at 50% speed, just artificially, not out of, it's not designed for this, but just because they want to force people to use their specific cards for this. And this sort of intentional crippling of hardware is not palatable to me at all.
That's crazy. Why don't they just make more? Usually when your product is in demand and people are buying a lot of it, this is not a problem for a company. You just make more.
I mean, this assumes they're not trying to already do this. Making a graphics card is a huge, logistical issue, right? You not only have to get you not only have to make the chip itself, which usually has to come from various different suppliers. You have to get the silicon, and you have to refine it, and that's like two or three companies right there. And then you have to, get it on the circuit board, design the circuit board, get the circuit board designed. Another company has to do that, and then you have to get all the various different components. So you're not only talking about the custom designed ASIC, you're talking about you have to get the ferrite chokes. You have to get the the back plates, the aluminum back plate. You have to get all the capacitors and all the other the cooling systems. So there's all these production things involved, and if one thing gets delayed or one thing can't get there on time, the whole production stops. And this is really the issue with a lot of modern productions, especially when you're talking in the era of COVID-19, where a lot of manufacturing just sporadically has been altered or compromised in some way. A lot of these products that depend on so many different factors all coming together can't produce enough of what they're trying to make. So graphics cards, PlayStation 5s, all these things are just, Nintendo Switches even, they can't make enough of these right now.
Well, but then I know another fine capitalist solution. You raise the price.
That's essentially what is happening artificially. People are buying up these cards, selling them on on eBay for inflated prices. But of course, that just makes the company look bad, and no one likes the scalpers.
But if it's a software throttling, somebody will just hack it.
That's what I'm thinking. I assume it's relatively easy to bypass, unless it's not, in which case they'll throttle everything that isn't a game. Which would mean that suddenly things like, password crackers, which you would legitimately use with a graphics card at your home, would also be crippled. Anyways, this artificial crippling of hardware for business reasons. No, I can't. I don't like this at all.
Now you just have to write a game that mines Bitcoin, that passes whatever test they have to call it a game.
Yeah, people have done that. Of course, they've made games, they put it on Steam, and the game, mines Monero or Bitcoin or whatever while you play, and they get in big trouble. But
Yeah. Well, anyway, they'll be entertaining hacking, getting around these misguided ideas. All right, and we got Alan with Nursery Cam.
Yes, Cyber Gibbons, also known as Andrew Tierney.
Yeah.
A rather prolific poster on Twitter.
Yeah.
Recently got into a big spat with a company called Nursery Cam. And this kind of story happens all the time. It's not particularly interesting as far as security vulnerabilities go, except that these happen to be cameras that are used inside of nurseries to supposedly enable parents to watch their children play in the nursery. And it's pretty bad. This company has hard-coded a password of admin 888, and pretty much anybody in the world can just log in and watch the feed from these nursery cams. And so he did the right thing. He tried to do the responsible disclosure and approach the company, and they were very rude to him and basically told him to get lost. Yeah. And then he publicized it, and it became one of these cybersecurity fights. Sam, I'm sure you're well
I've done a lot of
with this.
So did they have lawsuits and everything against him or what?
I don't think it's gotten to that point yet. Hopefully they'll just give up and disappear, because I don't think it's a very large company at all.
A solution would be you should have like a home VPN concentrator. And I've heard of these like home security gateways. That would be the obvious solution. Anybody getting from the outside into your home network should have to go through some kind of security device.
Right. And apparently these devices are sold with a firewall,
yeah.
But it's very easy to bypass. And according to Cyber Gibbons, you can do a trivial scan and identify these machines out there on the internet. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think he's right about the vulnerability. And this is very common that companies don't care. But I think the way to protect yourself at home is to put in some kind of security gateway. And I know some people have bought them a couple of years ago for like $200. You get a special home security device instead of an ordinary router that supposedly makes it harder for people to come in from the outside.
Yeah, yeah.
And that would seem to be the best thing, because now everything in your house is smart, your thermostat, your light bulbs and everything. And you probably can't reasonably test the security of all those devices. So it'd be better to just add another layer of security to protect them.
Yeah, although those devices never remain on the market for very long. I think Norton came out with one of those a few years back, and
Yeah.
it was available for a few months and then just disappeared.
Well, I think there's a business market here then for somebody to make one. And of course, if you're a hacker, you can make your own with a Raspberry Pi or something. But
Yeah, I recently purchased a device that pretends to be some kind of monitoring or gateway product. It's not entirely clear, but all they did was they took a Raspberry Pi clone, a Pine 64 board, and they loaded their own Linux well, you can't call it a Linux distro. They didn't make their own Linux distro, but they just took a Linux distro and modified it a little bit, loaded it onto an SD card, slipped it into this board, put it inside of a plastic case with a little LCD screen on it, and sold it for $200.
Yeah.
And it failed in the marketplace.
yeah,
But I bought it myself for $17 because they were dumping it on Amazon.
well, it's too bad those are not working. There was even, I think, a government contest to invent those devices a few years ago for this reason, because everybody's home is full of all this vulnerable junk.
I think it's just too complicated for a simple single device like that does not get configured by somebody who's knowledgeable.
Okay. Well, that's too bad, because certainly there's a need for this. Because
There is,
even if
yes.
you had only secure devices in your home, next week somebody will buy a new device that ends up connecting and ends up being insecure. So this is a very common problem in the world of security, that you have some device with some serious security flaw and you can't replace it and you can't upgrade it, and you have to protect it behind another security device outside.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, and so the last one here is Ruffle. Somebody told me this today. They were talking about Flash, and somebody has written a Flash player in Rust. And I haven't tested it yet, but this is actually a pretty brilliant idea. I mean, the problem with Flash is it's incredibly insecure, and the whole point of Rust is it's very secure. And I've got a workshop where you practice and you see this problem, memory corruption with C, and then you write Rust and it doesn't have that problem. So this might be a Flash player you can use without exposing yourself to great security flaws. I wonder how fast it is, because the Rust compilers I've seen have been very slow. But anyway, I thought it was a pretty brilliant idea. There's apparently a group of people that really love Flash and really don't want to abandon it. And this might be a good option. Anyway, I guess that's it. Any more comments?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording.